my boyfriend, Tobias, told me I was being selfish and insecure for not wanting him to move in with his female friend. He said if I truly trusted him, it wouldn't be an issue. To prove his twisted point, he spent the night in her bed and sent me a shirtless selfie as proof of his transparency. He thought he was testing my boundaries, but he had no idea I was about to flip the script and give him a test of his own. The text message glowed on my phone screen, a beacon of audacity in an ocean of disrespect. It was from my boyfriend, Tobias, and it had arrived just 30 minutes ago. He was asking, with a casualness that bordered on sociopathic, if I wanted to get dinner tonight because he had something important to discuss. This was the same Tobias who had spent the entire previous weekend at another woman's apartment. The same Tobias who, in a breathtaking act of psychological warfare, had sent me a shirtless selfie from her bed to make some kind of warped point about the nature of trust. Yes, that Tobias. I'm sitting here now, in the quiet of my apartment, staring at his name on my screen, caught in a mental tug-of-war. Is he genuinely so detached from reality that he believes this is normal? Or is this entire charade an elaborate, cruel experiment designed to see just how much degradation I'm willing to endure? After the absolute train wreck of the last 3 weeks, I'm leaning heavily toward a disturbing combination of both. To understand the depth of this insanity, you have to start at the beginning. This whole situation has been such a slow-motion catastrophe that I feel the need to lay it all out, piece by painful piece, just to convince myself that I haven't lost my own mind. I need to know if I'm the crazy one, or if my boyfriend has gleefully stomped over every conceivable boundary that defines a healthy relationship. It all began 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday that was otherwise unremarkable. Tobias came home from his marketing job, dropped his messenger bag by the door, and casually announced that his friend, Andrea, was in the midst of some intense roommate drama. Apparently, her roommate had vanished into the ether, leaving behind an empty room and a 2-week notice before rent was due. Andrea, he explained, was in a full-blown panic about making ends meet. It sounded like a standard-issue crisis among friends, and my immediate instinct was one of sympathy. I was ready to be the supportive girlfriend, to brainstorm solutions, maybe suggest some roommate finder websites or offer to blast her apartment listing across my social media channels. I was prepared for us to be a team, helping a friend in need. But Tobias had other plans. With the casual air of someone announcing they'd picked up milk on the way home, he dropped a bomb that detonated the foundations of our relationship. He informed me that he had decided to move into Andrea's spare room for a few weeks. He would cover the missing half of the rent, giving her a financial cushion while she searched for a new, permanent roommate. He said it as if it were the most logical, noble, and utterly unquestionable solution in the world. No discussion. No, how would you feel about this? Just a unilateral declaration that my boyfriend was, for all intents and purposes, moving in with another woman. The sheer absurdity of it made me laugh. It was a short, sharp bark of disbelief. Surely he was joking. This had to be a new, incredibly unfunny brand of humor he was trying out. What man on earth announces that he's taking up residence with a female friend and expects his girlfriend to simply nod, smile, and wish him well on his new domestic adventure? But the smile on my face faded when I saw his expression. He wasn't laughing. He was looking at me with an earnest, slightly baffled expression, as if he expected me to be impressed, to applaud his magnanimous and selfless nature. When I finally found my voice and told him, as calmly as I could, that I was not even remotely comfortable with that arrangement, his face hardened. A condescending film settled over his eyes. "You're being selfish," he said, the word landing like a slap. Selfish. Apparently, my desire for my boyfriend of 8 months not to cohabitate with another woman was a sign of a deep character flaw. He then launched into what I would come to recognize as his signature manipulative script. "If you trusted me," he began, his voice taking on the tone of a patient but disappointed teacher, "this wouldn't even be an issue. Your reaction right now is really showing your true colors." I tried, desperately, to steer the conversation back to the realm of sanity. I explained that this had nothing to do with a lack of trust in him and everything to do with fundamental boundaries and respect for our partnership. I pointed out that the vast majority of couples would find this situation unacceptable, regardless of how much they trusted each other. It was, I argued, an inherently intimate arrangement that was inappropriate for someone in a committed relationship. But Tobias was a master of deflection. He kept twisting my words, steering the conversation back to his pre-approved narrative. I was being controlling. I was insecure. He wielded these words like weapons, designed to make me feel ashamed, to make me retreat and apologize for having feelings in the first place. The argument raged for hours, a circular, exhausting battle of wills. He dredged up completely unrelated incidents, twisting them to fit his narrative. He brought up the time a male coworker had complimented my presentation at work, the time my ex-boyfriend, Brian, had texted me to ask if he'd left an old college textbook at my apartment. He presented these trivial, mundane interactions as if they were somehow equivalent to him physically moving his belongings into another woman's home and sharing a living space with her. The mental gymnastics required to equate a text message about a book with a multi-week cohabitation were, I had to admit, strangely impressive in their audacity. What truly infuriated me, however, was his portrayal of Andrea. He painted her as a damsel in distress, a helpless waif who would surely be cast out onto the cold, cruel streets were it not for his personal, heroic intervention. This woman is 25 years old. She has a degree, a stable job in graphic design, and as far as I knew, a fully functional brain. She was not helpless. There were 1,001 ways for a capable adult to handle a roommate bailing. She could have asked her parents for a short-term loan. She could have found a temporary subletta on Craigslist. She could have gotten a side gig to cover the difference for 1 month. But according to Tobias, I was a cold, heartless monster for even suggesting these perfectly reasonable alternatives. Every solution I proposed was systematically shot down. Nothing else would work. Only his personal, physical presence in her apartment could possibly avert this impending catastrophe. The hero complex was staggering. The ultimate betrayal, however, was yet to come. I discovered, through a slip of his tongue during one of our arguments, that he had been discussing our relationship problems in detail with Andrea. He had been complaining to her about my trust issues, seeking her counsel on how best to manage me. The image of the two of them, sitting in her apartment, analyzing my behavior, strategizing on how to handle their girlfriend problem, filled me with a white-hot rage. It was a profound violation, a secret alliance forged against me. I refused to back down. I stated my boundary clearly and calmly.
I was not okay with this.
I loved him, I trusted him, but I would not be in a relationship where this was considered acceptable. I suggested we could help her financially, that he could even give her the money for his share of the rent without actually living there. I thought, naively, that he might see the logic, that he would respect my feelings enough to find a compromise. I was so wrong. Last Friday, Tobias announced he was heading over to Andrea's to help her clean out and organize the spare room for her search for a new roommate. He said it would likely be a late night. I was fine with that. I had plans to meet my friend Laura for drinks anyway. I trusted him to go help a friend. But Saturday morning arrived with a deafening silence. No good morning text. No call. Nothing. When I finally texted him around 10 a.m. to ask how it went, his reply was infuriatingly casual. He said they had worked so late that he was too exhausted to drive home, so he had just crashed on her couch. Annoyance prickled at me, but I tried to be the cool, understanding girlfriend he claimed to want. Maybe it was a purely practical decision. But then, around noon, my phone buzzed. It was an Instagram notification. A photo, posted by Tobias.
It was a selfie.
He was shirtless, propped up on pillows, a sliver of an unfamiliar headboard visible behind him. It was clearly taken in a bed. Andrea's bed. And the caption, the smug, passive-aggressive caption, read, "Some people trust, some people don't." I stared at the screen for what felt like a lifetime, my brain struggling to catch up with the sheer, calculated cruelty of the act. My boyfriend had intentionally spent the night at another woman's apartment, had woken up in her bed, and had decided that the most appropriate course of action was to document it and send it to me as a taunt, disguised as a lesson in trust. The audacity was a physical force, knocking the wind out of my lungs. Who does that? Who weaponizes transparency in such a malicious way? It wasn't a gesture of honesty. It was a power move, a deliberate provocation designed to push every single one of my buttons. I called him, my hands shaking with rage. He answered on the first ring, his voice obnoxiously cheerful. When I demanded to know what in the hell he thought he was doing, he had the nerve to feign confusion. "I thought you'd appreciate the transparency," he said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. I didn't want to hide where I was. "I'm trying to be open with you." The conversation deteriorated from there. I told him that his idea of transparency was nothing more than glorified disrespect, that spending the night was a violation of our agreement, and that the photo was a deliberate act of cruelty. Instead of the apology I deserved, He doubled down. "You're just proving my point," he said, his voice losing its cheerful edge and hardening into that familiar condescending tone. "If you were really secure in our relationship, a photo wouldn't bother you. Your reaction is exactly why I feel like I have to walk on eggshells around you." He actually managed to frame my legitimate anger as the reason for his bad behavior. It was then that I truly understood. This was no longer about Andrea and her rent. This was a game to him. He was testing me, pushing the limits, trying to see how much disrespect I would swallow before I finally broke. The final nail in the coffin arrived on Sunday evening, in the form of a Facebook message from Andrea herself. I had never had a direct conversation with this woman in my entire life. Her message was a masterclass in condescension. She told me I needed to grow a backbone if I wanted to be with a man like Tobias. She called my insecurity embarrassing to watch and informed me that Tobias deserved a partner who could handle his friendships without creating all this drama. I screenshotted the message immediately. The nerve, the unmitigated gall of this woman to contact me, to lecture me about my own relationship, was staggering. And it confirmed, beyond any doubt, the depth of her involvement in our private affairs. When I confronted Tobias, showing him the screenshot, he wasn't even surprised. He defended her. "She's just looking out for me," he said calmly. "She sees how much her jealousy is stressing me out." He actually suggested that maybe I should take her advice to heart. That was it. That was the moment of horrifying clarity. I was dating a man who believed it was perfectly acceptable for his female friend to berate and belittle his girlfriend, and who saw her interference not as a betrayal, but as a sign of loyalty to him. And so, here we are, 3 weeks into this waking nightmare. And Tobias, in his infinite delusion, has just asked me to dinner to tell me something important. A part of me, the morbidly curious part, wants to know what other fresh hell he's about to unleash. But a much larger, colder, and more calculated part of me is already running through a script of my own. Because while Tobias has been busy playing his little psychological games, I've been quietly making some plans. It's time, I think, for him to learn that some tests have surprising and deeply unpleasant results. I'll let you know what happens. I have a feeling it's going to be a dinner to remember. I'm sitting in my car, in the dimly lit corner of the restaurant parking lot, because I needed to escape before I either burst into hysterical laughter or threw a plate at his head. What just transpired over a plate of overpriced pasta was not a conversation. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, and Tobias just graduated with honors. He thinks he won. He has no idea what he's just set in motion. I arrived at the restaurant about 10 minutes early, a deliberate choice to give myself time to center myself, to build a fortress of calm around my roiling anger. I was hoping, against all evidence, that his important news might be a sudden, miraculous return to sanity. Perhaps he'd realized the error of his ways, and this dinner was his attempt at a grand apology. That hope was extinguished the moment he walked through the door. He wasn't contrite. He was radiating a smug, self-satisfied confidence that set my teeth on edge. He slid into the booth, that charming smile I once adored, now looking like a predatory smirk. There was no apology, not even a hint of acknowledgement of the emotional chaos of the past week. He launched into small talk about his day, as if we were any other happy couple enjoying a Tuesday night out. When I finally cut through the charade and asked him what was so important, his expression shifted. He adopted a look of grave seriousness, like a doctor about to deliver a difficult diagnosis. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, his voice low and serious. "About us. About our future." My stomach did a nervous flip. The "we need to talk" tone is universal. But he wasn't breaking up with me. Oh no, it was so much worse. He began a long, rambling monologue about how our recent disagreements had highlighted some concerning patterns in my behavior. He was worried, he claimed, about my deep-seated trust issues and how they were poisoning our relationship. The sheer, unmitigated audacity to sit there, after sending me a shirtless photo from another woman's bed, and lecture me about my trust issues was so stunning it almost left me speechless. I did interrupt him. Asked if he was seriously trying to pin his own wildly inappropriate actions on me. He just held up a hand, a silencing gesture, and continued with his obviously rehearsed speech. He talked about mutual respect and compromise, and how he had been forced to reflect on whether I possessed the emotional maturity for the kind of adult relationship he desired. And then came the punchline. He announced, with the air of a king issuing a royal decree, that he had decided to move forward with his plan to live with Andrea, regardless of my feelings. He framed it as a principled stand. He wasn't going to let my insecurities dictate his loyalty to his friends. I just stared at him. He had just declared that he was choosing to move in with another woman, a decision that he knew was deeply hurtful to me, and he was spinning it as a noble act. I asked him, my voice dangerously quiet, if he was choosing Andrea's temporary housing problem over the health and boundaries of our relationship. "I'm not choosing anyone over anyone else," he replied smoothly, the lie sliding effortlessly from his tongue. "I'm simply refusing to abandon a friend in her time of need just because my girlfriend is feeling a little insecure." The rest of the dinner was a surreal journey into the twisted landscape of his mind. He was relentless. Every attempt I made to explain my perspective was met with a patronizing counterargument about how my feelings were irrational, a product of my own unresolved issues. He insisted that if I truly loved him, I would not only accept this arrangement, but celebrate his compassion. He was the hero, saving his friend. I was the villain, trying to hold him back with my petty jealousy. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I pointed out that there were dozens of other ways to help her that didn't involve him playing house with her. He dismissed them all as less effective. Apparently, Andrea specifically needed someone she could trust in her living space, and he was the only man for the job. He was her chosen protector, her safe harbor, and my feelings were just an inconvenient speed bump on his path to glory. The entire conversation felt like it was scripted from a gaslighter's handbook. My concerns were reframed as my character flaws. My boundaries were dismissed as controlling. He spoke with the calm, measured tone of a therapist, patiently explaining my own shortcomings to me, all while defending behavior that was indefensible. The double standard was the most galling part. I asked him, point blank, how he would feel if our roles were reversed. If I announced I was moving in with my friend, Mark, for a few weeks to help him out. Tobias actually laughed. "That's completely different," he said without a hint of irony. "Because I trust you. I'm secure enough not to be threatened by something like that." The smugness was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I pushed back, asking him to be honest, to truly imagine me living with another man. For a fleeting moment, his composure cracked. I saw a flash of raw, possessive anger in his eyes before he quickly masked it. "Hypotheticals aren't helpful," he said, reverting to his therapist voice. "You're just trying to trap me." This argumentative attitude is exactly the kind of thing that worries me. And then, the final, unbelievable twist. I asked what he envisioned for our relationship during this period. How would we see each other? Was I even welcome at Andrea's apartment? He became evasive, talking about the need for flexibility. Finally, after I pressed him, he admitted it. Andrea didn't feel comfortable with me coming over. My presence, she felt, would create tension. So, to summarize, my boyfriend was moving in with another woman for an indefinite period of time, and I was forbidden from visiting. And I was the one with the problem. I leaned back in my chair and just looked at him. Really looked at him. And in that moment, the fog of our 8-month relationship cleared. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was him. This was who he was, a master manipulator who wrapped his selfishness in the language of nobility. I asked him one last question. "If I told you I was moving in with Brian, your least favorite of my exes, would you be okay with it?" Truly, genuinely supportive. The flicker of rage in his eyes was back, hotter this time. He couldn't answer. He just accused me of trying to start a fight. By the end of the meal, his position was clear. He was moving in with Andrea, and my role was to be the good, quiet, supportive girlfriend who waited patiently for him to finish his heroic quest. But Tobias doesn't know me as well as he thinks he does. As he sat there, outlining the terms of my submission, my mind was already racing, formulating a new plan. He wants to test me?
Fine.
Let the games begin. I have some calls to make tomorrow. And if he thinks he knows how this story ends, he is in for a very, very rude awakening. The gloves are off. I'm having an absolutely marvelous time. Watching Tobias, the self-proclaimed master of emotional maturity, squirm and panic as his own manipulative games are turned against him has been more satisfying than I ever could have imagined. If he wanted to play, he should have been prepared to lose. As I mentioned, the gloves were coming off. On Wednesday, I began to set the stage for my little performance. That evening, just as I'd anticipated, Tobias sent a text. It was a breezy, matter-of-fact announcement that he would be packing his things over the weekend to officially move into Andrea's. He delivered this news as if he were informing me of a change in the weather. The sheer audacity was still stunning, but now it was also amusing. It provided the perfect opening. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I replied with a message dripping in saccharine sweetness. That's nice, honey. Make sure you pack your good toothbrush. Wouldn't want Andrea to think you have poor hygiene while you two are playing house together. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. He called within 10 minutes, his voice laced with confusion. Why are you being so sarcastic? He asked, clearly thrown off balance. Sarcastic? I replied, my voice a symphony of pure, unadulterated innocence. Not at all. I'm just trying to be supportive of your new, very progressive living arrangement with your close female friend.
The call was a delight.
He kept trying to bait me into a fight, to get the dramatic, tearful reaction he craved, but I refused to give it to him. I met his circular logic with relentlessly cheerful, obviously disingenuous support. When he explained, for the 10th time, why his decision was noble and just, I'd chime in with, "Oh, of course. That makes perfect sense. Andrea is so lucky to have such a dedicated friend to play roommate with." He grew increasingly frustrated. Why aren't you more upset about this? He finally asked, the exasperation clear in his voice. Oh, I've been doing a lot of thinking, I said, letting a mysterious pause hang in the air. I've come to some interesting conclusions about our relationship, but we can talk about that later. I have some plans of my own to sort out. The seed of doubt had been planted. He expected tears and begging. He got vague, ominous statements about my own plans. Thursday morning, the texts began. A photo of a moving box. A question about whether I wanted to help him load his car. The delusion was truly a sight to behold. I decided to lean into the absurdity. To his picture of a box of clothes, I replied, make sure to pack a nice outfit for your cozy dinner dates with Andrea. To a photo of his toiletries, I wrote, don't forget the condoms. You know, for all those late-night movie sessions on the couch. Safety first. He was utterly baffled. His replies were a series of confused, what do you mean? Texts, to which I would respond with a simple winking emoji. The beauty of it was that he couldn't accuse me of anything. I was just being helpful, wasn't I? Later that afternoon, it was time for phase 2. I texted my ex-boyfriend, Brian, the one Tobias so despised. We had ended things amicably years ago, and I knew he was a good guy. Asked if he wanted to grab coffee. He agreed immediately. Over lattes, I laid out the entire saga. Brian was appropriately horrified. No sane man does that to his girlfriend, he said, shaking his head. As we were talking, Tobias continued to text me updates on his packing. I started reading them aloud to Brian, and we both dissolved into laughter. It was then that I had my stroke of genius. Do you want to help me send him a little message? I asked Brian, a wicked glint in my eye.
He was all in.
We took a smiling selfie, the coffee shop bustling behind us. I posted it to my Instagram story with a caption, so nice catching up with old friends who actually understand and respect boundaries. 20 minutes. That's all it took.
My phone rang.
It was Tobias. Who are you with? He demanded, his voice tight with an emotion he would never admit was jealousy. Just Brian, I said breezily. We were just having a fascinating chat about relationship dynamics, actually. I could practically hear his jaw clenching. He started grilling me, asking why I was suddenly hanging out with my ex. I calmly explained that since he was busy exploring new living arrangements, I figured it was a good time for me to reconnect with old friends. His brain, I imagine, was short-circuiting. Friday morning, he called to inform me he was officially moved in with Andrea. The smugness was gone from his voice, replaced by a nervous energy. He kept asking about my plans, whether I was seeing Brian again. Oh, we might grab dinner later, I said casually. The silence on the other end of the line was golden. He launched into a lecture about why my situation with Brian was different and inappropriate. I simply reminded him of his own words, that only insecure people had problems with opposite-sex friendships. The hypocrisy was so thick, you could taste it. That night, Brian and I did go to dinner. And I documented it with the fervor of a war photographer. A picture of our clinking wine glasses. A selfie of us laughing. A final shot of us sharing a tiramisu with the caption, "It's amazing what happens when someone actually makes you feel like a priority." My phone exploded with texts from Tobias, which I happily ignored. When I finally called him back late that night, he was practically vibrating with rage. He accused Brian of trying to manipulate me. I just laughed. It's so interesting, I mused, that you're so worried about another man's motives when you've been lecturing me about trust for weeks. Why so insecure, Tobias? Over the weekend I escalated. Brian and I spent all of Saturday together, and I filled my social media with photos of our carefree, happy day. Tobias's texts became more and more frantic. On Sunday, Andrea tried to join the game, posting a series of cloying stories of her and Tobias's cozy domestic life. I screenshotted them and sent them to Brian with a string of laughing emojis. When Tobias called that night, the desperation was palpable. He was finally starting to understand that he had lost control of the narrative. He started backtracking, mumbling about compromises. But I was enjoying myself far too much to let him off the hook. Spending time with Brian has been really eye-opening, I told him. He's reminded me what it feels like to be with someone who actually values my feelings. The contrast is, well, it's pretty stark. He started spouting frantic I love yous, but it was too late. The game had been played, and he had been checkmated. It's Monday now, and he's been alternating between angry texts about my inappropriate friendship with Brian and pathetic pleas for us to talk. He wanted to test my boundaries. Well, he found them. And he's about to find out what happens when you push someone too far. Our final conversation is coming. And I can promise you, I won't be the one begging. I am still laughing. I am sitting on my couch, tears of pure, unadulterated joy streaming down my face, rewatching the screen recording of the FaceTime call that just ended my relationship and possibly Tobias's entire sense of self-worth. He really, truly believed he held all the cards. The poor, delusional fool. After a week of watching him unravel, I decided it was time for the grand finale. He had been bombarding me with texts, demanding that we discuss boundaries, a sentiment so outrageously hypocritical it was almost poetic. I agreed to a FaceTime call. He appeared on my screen from Andrea's apartment, a backdrop of beige walls and generic motivational art. He immediately launched into a prepared lecture on the inappropriateness of my rekindled friendship with Brian. He was literally sitting in the living room of the woman he had moved in with, about to school me on respectful behavior. But here's the beautiful secret I'd been keeping. My week with Brian hadn't just been a performance for Tobias's benefit. It had been real. We had rediscovered something we'd lost years ago, an easy, genuine connection. And the day before, he had surprised me with 2 first-class, non-refundable tickets to Italy. We were leaving next week. A 10-day trip through Rome and Tuscany, staying in a boutique hotel with a private balcony overlooking a vineyard. So, as Tobias droned on with his manipulative drivel, I just smiled. A wide, genuine, happy smile. I interrupted his monologue to tell him how wonderful my week had been. Brian is just amazing, I gushed. It's incredible to be with a man who knows how to treat a woman, who actually prioritizes her happiness. The color began to drain from his face. I could hear other voices in the background. He had assembled an audience, his friends, no doubt to bear witness to him putting me in my place. Big mistake. Their presence only emboldened me. In fact, I continued, my voice sweet as poison. Brian has been staying over. He brought me coffee in bed this morning. It's been lovely. Tobias was sputtering, his carefully constructed composure crumbling. He tried to argue that his situation was different, but the words caught in his throat. I leaned in closer to the camera. How is it different, Tobias? Please explain it to me. And to your friends who I can hear listening. We're all very curious. That's when he snapped. The calm, rational therapist was gone, replaced by a red-faced, yelling child. He called me vindictive. He called me crazy. I could hear one of his friends in the background mutter, "Dude, just chill." And then I delivered the killing blow. Oh, and speaking of how wonderful Brian is, I said, my smile widening. He surprised me with a little trip. We're going to Italy next week. 10 days. First-class flights. A 5-star hotel in Tuscany. He's a keeper. I saw Tobias's soul leave his body. I think I even heard a gasp from someone off camera, possibly Andrea herself. I wasn't done. You know, Tobias, I said, adopting a tone of faux concern, you should really enjoy this little roommate situation with Andrea while it lasts. Because, let's be honest, the moment she finds an actual boyfriend, where do you think you're going to go? You're not her knight in shining armor, honey. You're her helper boy, her personal assistant who pays rent. You're a placeholder. A very expensive doormat. The silence from his end was deafening. I could hear his friends trying and failing to suppress their laughter. I give it 2 months. I twisted the knife. Before she brings some new guy home, and your special friendship suddenly isn't so important. I hope you're saving up for a security deposit because you're going to be kicked to the curb. He finally exploded. Get over yourself or get lost, he screamed, his face a mask of fury. I'm giving you one last chance to stop this, or we are done. I burst out laughing. A full, genuine, joyful laugh. Tobias, sweetie, I said, wiping a tear from my eye. We've been done. You moved in with another woman, and I moved on to a man who knows my worth. There is no last chance. I already upgraded. The panic in his eyes was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. He started backtracking immediately, but I was on a roll. While you're busy assembling Andrea's IKEA furniture, Brian and I will be sipping wine on our private balcony in Tuscany. Have fun being her live-in handyman. Maybe she'll even let you hold her purse while she goes on dates with actual men. His friends were now openly howling with laughter. I could hear Andrea's indignant voice in the background, telling them to shut up. And then I hung up. My phone immediately erupted with texts from a dozen random numbers as Tobias, in his desperation, apparently started grabbing his friends' phones. The pleas were pathetic. Then came the inevitable message from Andrea herself, telling me my behavior was embarrassing. I screenshotted it, posted it to my story with a caption, "When your ex's sugar mama tries to give you advice," and watched as my friends absolutely roasted her in the comments. Brian finds the whole thing hysterical. We've been looking at pictures of our hotel all evening. And through the grapevine, I've heard that Tobias is now telling everyone that I'm a manipulative, vindictive psycho. The man who moved in with another woman and sent me a selfie from her bed thinks I'm the manipulator. The irony is delicious. He thought he could play me. But while he was busy being Andrea's errand boy, I was busy securing a man who treats me like a queen. Living well isn't just the best revenge. It's a spectator sport. And I can't wait to post pictures from Italy.